Hello, and welcome once again to Friday Focus, where we do not focus on what is seen, but on what is unseen. And today we're going to be taking a look at the book of Daniel. Anybody, I think, who's ever gone to Sunday school or been around the church is familiar with the biblical stories of the 3 Hebrew children in the fiery furnace and Daniel in the lion's den. These stories are from the book of Daniel, but there are likely some things about Daniel that you hadn't considered. Note the following. Number 1, did you know Daniel was a POW? Yeah, that's right. As a very young man, he was a war prisoner and deported to Babylon. Secondly, Daniel was likely a vegetarian. He turned down the king's buffet for vegetables and water. And number 3, did you realize that a lot of photos may show Daniel as a young man in the lion's den, but he was actually in his 80s when thrown into the lion's den. He had already served the kings of Babylon and now served King Darius of Persia when the incident took place. Although only 12 chapters long, the book is packed full of mystery and adventure. Daniel is a definite must-read. Now, I've chosen some key verses that I'd like you to consider. The first one is from Daniel chapter 1, verses 19 and 20. The king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the royal service. Whenever the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters in his entire kingdom. Then Daniel chapter 2, verse 31, in your vision, your majesty, you saw standing before you a huge statue of a man. It was a frightening sight. And then also Daniel chapter 3, verses 17 and 18, if we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Then I have listed as well from the book of Daniel, chapter 9, verses 25 through 27. It goes on to say, now listen and understand. 7 sets of 7 plus 62 sets of 7 will pass from the time the command is given to rebuild Jerusalem until a ruler, the anointed one, that's Jesus Christ, by the way, comes. Jerusalem will be rebuilt with streets and strong defenses despite the perilous times. After this period of 62 sets of 7, the anointed one will be killed, appearing to have accomplished nothing, and a ruler will arise whose armies will destroy the city and the temple. The end will come with a flood and war, and its miseries are decreed from that time to the very end. The ruler will make a treaty with the people for a period of 1 set of 7, but after half this time, he will put an end to the sacrifices and offerings. And as a climax to all his terrible deeds, he will set up a sacrilegious object that causes desecration until the fate decreed for this defiler is finally poured out on him. This brings us to our 5 questions. The first one being, who wrote Daniel? Well, it's generally accepted the prophet Daniel authored the book, and you can check that out in Daniel chapter 9, verse 2, chapter 10, verse 2. But then also, Jesus also indicates that Daniel wrote the book. If you look at Matthew chapter 24, verse 15. When was Daniel written? Well, scholars think Daniel was likely written somewhere between 540 and 530 BC. Our third question, where did Daniel take place? The book's events took place in Babylon, which later became part of the Kingdom of Persia. And what is Daniel about? Well, chapter 1 describes the conquest of Jerusalem by the Babylonians. Many people, including Daniel and his 3 friends, were deported to Babylon. Chapters 2 through 4 record Nebuchadnezzar's dream that only Daniel could interpret. The dream of a great statue represented the kingdoms that would arise in the future. The king makes a great statue of himself and forced everyone to worship it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego refused and were delivered by God in a fiery furnace. Finally, the king is judged by God for his pride, after which he is restored to his kingdom. And just by way of a little extra information, we know that the fiery furnace was not a problem for the Babylonians because they used to fire bricks. And they had large ovens and large kilns, and they would put a shine on the bricks that they made. So fiery furnaces were fairly easy to come by, and that's exactly where the king put the 3 Hebrew children. Then chapters 5 and 6 expose King Belshazzar's abuse of the items from the Jerusalem temple. The king receives a message from God and suffers judgment. Under the new Persian king, Daniel is thrown into the lion's den for refusing to pray to King Darius. He was spared when God intervened. And then in chapter 7, we learn of Daniel's dream of 4 beasts who represent the kingdoms of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And finally, chapters 8 through 12 record the vision of a ram and a goat with multiple horns, which referred to future kingdoms and their rulers. After this is recorded Daniel's 70 weeks prophecy, a God-given timeline of when the Messiah would appear and then be cut off. The prophecy also leaps far into the future and talks of a ruler who will make a 7-year covenant with Israel, but will keep it for only 3.5 years, after which follows judgment and the end of all things. After this vision, an angel comes to strengthen Daniel and explain what the vision meant. And then we have the next question, which is, why was Daniel written? Daniel was a written record of his experience and prophecies for the Jewish exiles during the Babylonian captivity. To those being held in captivity, the book makes it clear that Israel's God is the supreme ruler over heaven and over earth. Although they had wandered far from God, God had not wandered far from them. And that brings us to the Daniel takeaway. What can we learn? What is there for us in this day and age that we can take into our lives that is practical and help us to live for the Lord in a way that honors and pleases Him? The stories of the fiery furnace and Daniel in the lion's den speak strongly of the Lord's ability to save us amid troubles. The prophecies and visions are clear indicators that God is in total control of the future, which means we can trust our future to Him completely. When God plans, He does so down to the minutest detail. Everything is as He predicts it. Therefore, we can trust God with our life, our life's events, and our eternal future. As the songwriter Ira Stanfill wrote, "Many things about tomorrow I don't seem to understand, but I know who holds tomorrow, and I know who holds my hand." This is Dr. Vic Hollyfrin in His grace. If you have comments or questions, touch base with me, vicsfridayfocus@gmail.com. God bless you. Have a terrific week.